record.
Okay, let's get going.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to lesson 6. It's hard to believe we're in our final lesson of this course, the world of Kabbalah. It feels like these 6 weeks have flown by, but here we are. We've reached the end, or perhaps we've reached the beginning, because this is a Kabbalah course. So maybe we're just at the beginning. Maybe we're coming full circle, and instead of the end, we're at the pinnacle, or again, right at the start. We'll find out tonight as we move through tonight's class. So let's get started. You remember back in lesson 3, I think it was, we were introduced to the term Or Ein Sof, right? The Or Ein Sof. That's a very common term you'll find in Kabbalah. And the term Or Ein Sof we translated as the infinite light. Now, that translation, the infinite light, already any translation of any text is already a commentary as well. But if we were to just isolate those words, like let's take the word or, light, Ein Sof, no end, light, no end. And so there's some conversation among the mystics as to what exactly we're talking about when we say Or Ein Sof. We've already defined it, we've already explained, we've already categorized it, but let's take a step back for a second. And the mystics discuss Or Ein Sof. How would you translate it? Would you translate it as the light that has no end, right? Which we're just saying the infinite light, right? Or the light that has no end? Or would you translate it as the light of the one with no end? The light of the infinite one. That's what I'm saying? So we already know where we're going because we translate it as the infinite light. But you could also maybe read it as the light of the infinite one. But we didn't translate it that way because we reject that understanding of the term Or Ein Sof, the light of the infinite one. Why is that? Because if we were to translate it, the light of the infinite one, right? So then who's the infinite one? That would be the source of the light, right? The ultimate source. Well, if we're going to refer to the source of that light, why would we refer to him, okay, the infinite, again, lost in translation, but why would we refer to him as Ein Sof, as no end? It would be more compelling if we called the source of the light no beginning, something with no beginning, right? Because something could have no end and still have a source, still originate somewhere, but so it might extend outward infinitely, but it has a starting point. The more compelling thing is there's only something that has no beginning, right? So for that reason, we don't refer, when we say Or Ein Sof, we understand it to mean the infinite light of the source of light. And what's the source? That's tonight's topic, the source, and how we refer to the source. So let's start here with text 1 from the Alter Rebbe. Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the founder of the Chabad movement. This weekend is his special holiday of his release from prison. And it's a time that is commemorated and regarded as the New Year for Jewish mysticism. So very appropriate to be reading from him here. Now, text 1 on page 177, okay? It says like this. We refer to God's light as Ein Sof, without end, instead of Ein Lo Tchila, without a beginning. This preference appears puzzling because essentially there's no difference. Anything that has no beginning also has no end, as is known. The truth is that if we intend to refer to God's very essence, it would indeed be appropriate to use the phrase Ein Lo Tchila, without a beginning. However, what we describe as Ein Sof is in fact God's light and radiance and not God himself. To clarify, when the Kabbalists speak of the Or Ein Sof, their intention is the endless light of God, not the light of the endless one. They're not attempting to describe the origin of the light as endless, for we cannot describe God himself as endless. Right? It would be inappropriate to refer to God as having no end. More appropriate would be to say he has no beginning, right? But we don't find God being referred to as the one with no beginning. We just find this term Or Ein Sof. And Or Ein Sof, as we know, and as we've defined it in previous classes, is part of the realm of godliness, right? It's not God himself, but part of godliness. And even last week when we talked about the tzimtzum, the contraction and the concealment and the infinite light, and we got way back up, right above Hishtalshalos, even right above this whole chain of emanation and creation, even there, we're talking about godliness, right? Not God himself. Some of the mystics refer to angels as an example of something that has no end. There are certain angels that are infinite angels. There are angels that have certain lifespans, but there are angels that are infinite. But of course they have a beginning. Angels are created during the process of creation. So you can find something that has no end, but not something with no beginning. That would only be God. And so then what term do we use when we're referring to God himself? So that brings us to our first key term tonight, the term atzmut, atzmos, which means essence. Now, again, when we're talking about essence, we're not talking about godliness, we're talking about God himself, right? And so tonight's class, the topic of tonight's class is infinitely removed, you could say, from everything we've spoken about really until up to this point. Because until now, we've been talking about godliness and creation, and now we're talking about God himself, that we refer to as essence. Now, the problem is, when you talk about essence, how do you define essence? And how do you describe it? How do you define it? If you remember, we told a story in one of the earlier classes about the Alter Rebbe, who we just quoted, and his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek. And we talked about how the child, Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Chabad, Rebbe Nachum Mendel, this little child was playing on his grandfather's lap in his study, and his grandfather says, "Where's grandfather? Where's Zayda?" And so the young boy pointed to his beard, a nice, big, impressive beard. He said, "No, that's his beard." Right? You remember the story. He pointed here, pointed there. This is his head. Those are his eyes. This is his nose. He couldn't get the correct answer where he is. He kept pointing to him, and he kept saying, "No, this is this, and this is that." A little while later, he was off playing, and suddenly he cries, "Zayda, grandfather!" And his grandfather turns around, startled, and he says, "There's grandfather, right there he is." So we can you point to parts of somebody, you're not technically wrong. This is my beard. But it's a beard. It's not me, right? When you talk about who are you, even if you want to get into, your thoughts, your dreams, your loves, your passions, your hobbies, your interests, all of that are aspects of you. But what's actually you? How do you define the core? Well, we call that essence. And here words kind of fail us. Let's take a look at text 2. Text 2 on page 178. Every title is a description, an attempt to describe something about a particular entity. It follows that the recipient of the title is an entity with a degree of definition or limitation that lends itself to description. Now, none of this is true of God's essence, and we are left without any form of name or title by which to refer to him. Our knowledge of Atzmos is limited to the fact that he creates. Consequently, we have no way to refer to Atzmos other than to describe him as creator. Or put in other terms, right? When we can't talk about aspects of it, because then it's not the core, it's not the essence itself. So words will fail us, right? So what do we have to say, right? What's the first thing we can know about Atzmos then, about God's essence, is that you can't really define it. It's not definable. Once you have a definition, if you can take something and analyze it, then there's still ways to strip away the parts of it till you get to its core, right? To its essence. The essence, once you get to an essence, if it's even possible, you're kind of going to be looking at nothing. You're going to strip everything away. It's undefinable. Yeah. And so his essence is undefinable, right? So God is, right, undefinable. I guess if God in his essence was filling out a survey and he had to identify himself in some way, it would probably be other, I guess. I don't know. Right? So this is the first thing we can tell you about. But again, we can then close our books and move on, and that's it. But if this is tonight's topic and we're talking about an undefinable thing, but the truth is there's a lot we can know about God in his essence. Okay. But the first thing is he's undefinable, which is why God doesn't appear anywhere on our map, the handouts that you have or the map behind me, right? He's not part of the story of creation. Well, he's the creator, the source of it all, but Atzmos is not another level, another aspect of God, another step in that process of anything. He just is an undefinable existence, right? And this idea that God is that we can know this line here, in text 2, our knowledge of Atzmos is limited to the fact that he creates, right? So all we can do is refer to him as creator. I think what that means, it brings us to the second point about Atzmos, is God as creator means that God exists. So what we could say about the essence of God is that we can't define it, right? And really not even in a negative sense. You can't even say that it's undefinable, because even saying something's undefinable is a form of a definition. It's in the negative, but it's also a definition. So God is undefinable even in the negative sense. And also, though, we have to say that he necessarily exists. God is the ultimate or the only real existence. Okay, and from which everything comes. So in other words, if our starting point is we look around, we see ourselves and we see our world, we know that we all exist. When we get back to the source, we have to recognize the only thing we can know about our source is that the source exists. Right? So the essence of God, that's an essential existence, a necessary existence, right? And everything that comes from it is all conditional. Since he's the source, everything else, it could exist, it could not exist, right? So the only essential, necessary existence is God in his essence. Everything else is optional, essentially. Okay? So when you talk about, so you talk about the essence, right? The essence of everything is that it doesn't essentially have to even be. So the essence of anything is that it's not necessarily anything, whereas the essence of God is essentially has to be. Okay. Now, another thing we can know about the essence of God, if he's the source of everything, so he exists outside and beyond everything, so then he's not bound by any rules. He's the one who makes all the rules. Right? He's the source of all of the rules. And he's not therefore defined and limited by any of them. So last week, for instance, we got into a whole discussion about the infinite light and the finitude, right? We talked about and so how does finite emerge from infinity? And so there has to be a concealment, right? There are all these rules and regulations in order to make this stuff happen. And everything we've been talking about really over these last couple of weeks, there's a whole process, there's a method to the madness, there's a purpose, God is not limited to any of those things. In other words, when we said last week that to label something infinite is to define it to infinity, which is a limitation, right? And we said we can't even put that limitation even on the Or Ein Sof, on the infinite light of God. Even the infinite light can't be limited to infinity. It possesses the potential for being finite as well, but it's not so simple to get it. There has to be a contraction, there has to be concealment, there has to be tzimtzum, right? It's not so simple. But when it comes to the essence of God here, there are no rules. It's not just that you can't label him infinite and that thereby limit him to being limit him from not and prevent him from being finite, or to say he's finite, or to say he's beyond both of those definitions, both of those labels. None of them apply. Let's take a look at text 3 from the Rebbe. He says in 184, in truth, even infinity does not express atzmos. Rather, God's essence is neither finite nor infinite. The qualities of infinity and finitude apply exclusively to divine revelation. So it starts in godliness, the limits of infinite and finite. God is neither of those. So and this brings us to our second key term, a term that was coined by the Rashba, a great 13th century mystic, but primarily a halachic authority, who coined the phrase. I think he's the one who came up with the term nimna hanimnois. Nimna hanimnois, which means the impossibility of the impossible. Right? What's an example of the impossibility of the impossible? So the classic example is the where we saw the essence of God revealed in this world, which was where? In the Holy of Holies in the temple. So in the Holy of Holies, which is the holiest place in the world, and the holiest place within, right? The holiest place in the world is Israel. The holiest place in Israel is Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, it's the Temple Mount. In the Temple Mount, it's the actual structure of the temple. In the temple, the sanctuary. The holiest place is the Holy of Holies. And the holiest thing in the Holy of Holies is the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, which wasn't, by the way, even in the second temple. It was hidden before the destruction of the first temple. It was hidden and never seen again. But the Ark is described in the book of Exodus, where the Torah instructs us in how to build all the vessels of the temple. And the Ark was a gold-plated wooden box, right? That had dimensions. It was 2.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits, right? 2.5 cubits wide, 1.5 cubits in width, in length, and 1.5 cubits in height. And you had the cherubs on top of it, right? We all know the ark, right? The whole thing. Now, the ark sat in the Holy, it housed the tablets, the two sets of tablets, and it was in the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies itself was a room that measured 20 cubits across. And so the tradition tells us that if you walked into the Holy of Holies, which the high priest did on Yom Kippur, and you'd see the Ark of the Covenant right there in the center of the room. The Ark of the Covenant facing, as you would enter and face it, would be 2.5 cubits, right, wide. And yet, in that room that was 20 cubits wide, if you measured from one wall, from the right wall of the Ark, you measure to that wall to your right, you'd get 10 cubits. And if you measured from the left wall to the other side, you'd get another 10 cubits. And if you measured from one wall to the other wall, you'd still get 20 cubits, which means the ark simultaneously took up space and didn't take up space, which is not something that's fathomable. It's not something that our minds can wrap. We can't wrap our minds around that. It's incomprehensible, this concept that something could take up space and not take up space at the exact same time. Simultaneously be something that has definition, has borders, measurement, and occupy no space. It's not something we can fathom. What was the purpose of this? God doesn't just do miracles for no reason. The purpose of this is to illustrate this idea that the revelation of God's essence, the essence is not bound by any of it. So if we operate in a world of structure and borders and definition, and even the higher realms. So even like the world of Atzilus has its definitions, has its limitations, even though it's spiritual in nature, it's not physical, obviously, but it still has its certain definitions and structure. And incompatible things are incompatible. To the essence of God, nothing's incompatible because God is beyond any of this stuff, right? And so therefore, to illustrate that ultimate flex, so to speak, of atzmos and action is something occupying space and not occupying space at the same exact time, right? Okay, so now we have an inkling of how hard how it's impossible really to understand the essence of God, because what we just said is not something we can even comprehend, right? And that's sort of an expression of the divine essence. Okay, so what we know about the essence now, we know that it has no definition. We know that it exists necessarily, essentially, and we know that it's not bound by any rules. Right, which, by the way, allows us to appreciate a very enigmatic midrash. The midrash says, let's take a look at text. This is an interesting midrash. He says like this: from the start of the universe's creation, God foresaw the deeds of the righteous and the deeds of the wicked. As it is stated, God knows the way of the righteous and the way of the wicked, that is doom. This was represented at the start of creation as follows: the earth was chaotic and desolate. This refers to the deeds of the wicked. God declared, let there be light. This refers to the deeds of the righteous. We touched on those two verses and the implications in previous classes as well. Anyway, Midrash continues. However, the narrative has yet to clarify the genre of deeds that God desires. Is it these or those? This is clarified in the following verse. God saw the light, that the light was good. Clearly, God desires the deeds of the righteous and does not desire the deeds of the wicked. So let's deconstruct this passage here in the Midrash. Midrash says, you open up the book of Genesis, right, to the beginning. The beginning, it says, the land was chaotic and desolate, right? We talked about the chaos, the world of Tohu. And that's a reference to the behavior of the wicked. And then it says, then God said, and God declared it to be light. The light is the light of the righteous that shines. And then the Midrash says, stop. At this point, we've learned that God creates the world, and he creates, as we said before, he knows already in the future what's going to be. He creates sort of the wicked, the path of the wicked, and the chaos wrought by the wicked, and he creates the light, the goodness that shines from the righteous. But we still don't know which one he desires. The next verse tells us, when it says that God saw the light, that it was good, so that tells us that God prefers the light of the righteous as opposed to the chaos of the wicked. So how do we understand this statement? What was that supposed to mean? Shouldn't it be obvious that God would prefer the righteous over the wicked? I mean, is there even a comparison between the two? But now we can really understand. And the truth is, the commentaries struggle with this midrash because it's so puzzling. How could you even suggest that God might favor the wicked over the righteous, right? That he'd prefer the chaos over the light, and that it's only because the verse tells us that God saw the light, it was good. Oh, now we know that God that's what he chooses. The truth is that God could have chosen either. The truth is that from the essence of God is not compelled by anything. Since he's the only necessary existence and not definable, right? And nothing could compel him because he's the source of everything, right? So if nothing can compel him, who's to say what he would choose? In other words, we look at things, we see good and we see bad. So if you're a terrorist, you choose bad. If you're a decent person, you choose good. It's not really much of a choice. And even if you're a regular person, sometimes you choose good, sometimes you choose bad. The choices are being made for you in a sense, right? But if you're not compelled by either one, if the two choices in front of you are equal, neither one speaks to you more than the other, then the choice is entirely yours. So if God is not compelled by anything outside of himself, so he could see the wicked, he could see the righteous, and go either way. Now, to just calm everybody down from this thing, in the end, we see the Torah tells us that God saw the light, it was good. So we know what he chose in the end, so we can all, sleep comfortably tonight. But the truth is, just another point that's sort of, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but just really, we also have to think, because just once we're on the subject, when when we say good and evil, well, what do we even mean? We live in a world where we create rules, we establish rules, and we live by those rules, or we break those rules. So we're good if we have good rules that further society and civilization, whatever. And if you follow those, you're a good citizen. If you don't, you're a bad citizen, you're a criminal, whatever. But the good and evil is the good and bad is kind of arbitrary. When we talk about God, it's not that God chooses good and turns away from evil. You can say, and this is a different point than the point we just made, but just another relevant, I think, idea, that when God chooses good, that's what makes it good. The light of the righteous is good because that's what God chose. The chaos of the wicked is bad because God rejected it. In other words, it's not that the chaos of the wicked is bad and the righteous are good, and because God's not bound, he could go good or bad. Whatever God's going to choose, that the fact that God chose it, that's what makes it good also, right? So it's not the goodness of the thing, of the choice, that compels God. God chooses, what God chooses is good, what God rejects is bad. Okay, so you're looking at whichever angle you're going from, this hopefully this makes some sense. But which brings us to another part, right? The next key term, number 3 tonight, bechira chavshis, free will. And as it turns out, really, when we all talk about free will. There are books written about it all the time. There's a new book I think recently came out on free will. We don't have it. We do have it. But most people seem to think we don't. They might not be even so wrong on a certain level. Of course, we have free will, but the ultimate free will exists only in the essence of God. Now, we'll find out eventually, even though it's not tonight's topic, but hopefully we'll connect the dots and see whether that applies to us as well. We'll leave that for you to draw your own conclusion at the end of tonight's class. But at this point, the only one capable of free choice, meaning a choice that's free of compulsion from anything outside of itself, is only the essence of God, only Atzmos. He's free to choose either way, right? Now, ultimately, God chooses to create and make a world and create good, and he creates good, he creates evil, he creates us with choice, and there's something that he's after, obviously, but that's stuff that he chose of his own free will. It wasn't something that he was compelled to do. Which another point that emerges from this, a very important point, is that this gives us insight to understanding the mechanics of tshuva, repentance, right? Tshuva is the idea of returning and being forgiven for past misdeeds is a concept, that a gift of Judaism to the world, and it's an essential value in Judaism. In fact, it's in Maimonides, I believe, I think Maimonides, it doesn't even count it as one of the mitzvahs. It's not a mitzvah because it's sort of like an underlying theme that underlies all of that, in a sense, sort of animates all of the commandments. So it exists almost beyond or above all of the commandments, and therefore beyond even good and evil. What does this mean? Let's take a look at text 5 from Maimonides. Actually, he says, nothing stands in the way of tshuva, repentance. Even if one denied God's existence throughout their life and then repented in their final moments, they merit a portion of the world to come. Right? So, but for a second, what does it mean? So we see that nothing can stand in the way of repentance. You can live an ungodly life your entire life, and at the moment of death, you proclaim, your fidelity, you proclaim your faith in God, and that's it. You're good. What does that mean? Or first of all, we see that that's very powerful, right? But where does that come from, though? Right? How is it that somebody could live their whole life and proclaim themselves to be atheists and then in the last moment turn to God? Where does it even come from? Your whole life you're an atheist. What changed? Do you even have it in you, right? So let's take a look at text 6. Violations of the divine will is from the Rebbe. It says, violations of the divine will are felt most keenly by the divine author who scripted that will. On the other hand, God transcends his own will and is not compelled to react to violations in a particular way. For who can tell him, what are you doing? Consequently, through tshuva, which is loftier than all of the mitzvahs and which touches the innermost depth of God's desire, one can obtain atonement. What does this mean? So it's interesting. Imagine, you're the CEO of a company, right? As the CEO of the company, you create certain rules for your workspace, for your employees, right? You have a rule, you have to show up at 9 and you can't leave till 5. That's the rule that you create, right? Now, what happens if one of your employees shows up at 10 and leaves at 3, right? What happens then? Well, HR gets involved, right? Or his manager, depending how big your company is, right, gets involved. And what are they supposed to do? Well, they have to, dock your pay. They have to maybe warn you, and maybe they have to suspend you. Maybe they'll fire you, whatever. They're limited in what they can do for you because you're breaking the rules of the company. Now, who's impacted most by you breaking the rules in the company? Besides, obviously, yourself, because you're going to get yourself in trouble. The owner of the company, the CEO. It's his company, it's his bottom line that's impacted and affected, and it's his rule. The guy in middle management or whatever he's just doing his job, right? He's also just clocking in and clocking out, getting his paycheck. So the guy in middle management is not really affected by maybe it affects morale on your team, whatever. But he's not that affected or offended for that matter by you breaking the rules, right? And yet also, his hands are tied in that he's going to have to react in a certain way to you. Right? He's not at liberty to suspend any of these rules for you. The one who's impacted the most by your negligent behavior, is the CEO, the one who made the rules. And yet it's precisely because he made the rules that he can override the rules and say, whatever, I like you. So, right? He can break. So here's the thing. God is the one who gives us the commandments. Who's hurt when we violate a commandment or when we commit a sin? The one who's hurt the most is God. They're his commandments, and violating them hurt him. And yet, because they're his commandments that he desires, he's the one who desires them, he also is at liberty to forgive you for violating them. Which tells you another point, which is that your relationship with God is deeper than his relationship with the commandments. There's another enigmatic medrash that says, that we know that there are two beginnings, right? Also, it says in the Torah, the first word is Bereshit, Beis Reshit, right? The two beginnings. God creates the world for two purposes: the Torah and the Jewish people. So the Midrash says, I don't know which one comes first, or in other words, who's more important? Is it the Torah that's more important and the commandments, or the Jew? Which one is more important? I don't know. So I look into the Torah and I see, what does it say in the Torah? Command the Jewish people, instruct the Jewish people, speak to the Jewish people. From that I see, right, again, similar kinds of midrash, right, where you look at the verse in the Torah, and the Torah itself gives you the clue and says the Jewish people are more important, right? Because the purpose of the Torah is to instruct the Jew who's more important than the Torah, right? But here too, the Torah is something that's God's wisdom. The mitzvahs, the commandments are God's will. We're talking about something that emanates from God in his own free choice, his own free will. And yet there's something that's deeper than that in God's will. Or something deeper than that in God's essence, and that is us, which is why we have that capacity for atonement, even when we commit sin. So God, we can, but here that begs the question: how do we access the essence of God? You commit a sin, you're behaving in that way with God. How do you have that capacity to trigger or to access the essence of God? And the answer is, just as we've been saying in all these classes, that there's a parallel, right, between the topics, the mystical topics we're talking about in our own lives, right? So like when we talked about biyah, right, in our first class, there's the correlation to our garments, right, our behaviors. And when we talked about tzimtzum, we talked about our ability to be humbled, and so on. There's a correlation between God's essence and us, and that is the essence of our soul. Which brings us to the next term tonight, Yechida. Yechida, which means the united one, or oneness. Right, the essence of the soul that is inexorably united with God. So we know the mystics tell us that there are 5 names for the soul. The soul has 5 names, and when we say names, we mean really levels as well. There are levels to the soul: nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechida. The highest level being yechida. Now, just we introduced this term yechida now, but there's another term which is not on our chart, which is etzem hanefesh, the essence of the soul. Generally, in Kabbalah and Chassidic literature, you'll find these two terms being used interchangeably. But if we want to be precise, what we're talking about tonight is not really Yechida, because as we just said, there are 5 names to the soul, which are 5 levels of the soul. If it's a level, then it's not it. We started by saying tonight, we're not talking about another level in Hishtalshelus, we're talking about the essence of God, not a level, right? So the same is true about the soul. There are 5 levels. So even Yechida, we use that term sort of loosely with the essence of the soul. They kind of use it interchangeably, but if we wanted to be precise and technical, what we're referring to is the essence of the soul that's even deeper than Yechida, but that level of Yechida represents sort of that oneness and that unity between the soul and its source in God. Okay, now let's take a look at text 7 from the Rebbe. Page 191. Together, the Jewish people and God form one complete entity, so to speak. This is due to the bond between the very essence of the soul and God's essence. By contrast, while the soul's various expressions and powers also enjoy a relationship with God, the relationship is susceptible to damage as a consequence of the person's choices. The soul's essence is always intimately bound and united with God, in a unity that our sages depict as merged and bonded with you in a oneness to be one with you, right? So it's that essence of our soul that moves us to that part of our soul that is incorruptible, the part of our soul that never engages in bad behavior and bad choices. That part of our soul that always feels one with God, it's that part of the soul that triggers us to return to God.
A good conscience?
No, much deeper than a good conscience, much deeper. Yeah, it's essence than a good conscience. It's not your good conscience or a good inclination. It's the core of who you are. And when that's triggered, that's always linked. It's one, as we quoted, right? It's bonded with you in a oneness to be one with you. It's just total oneness, right? So another thing now, so we're up to 6 things. We started by saying that we can't understand Atzmos, and now we have 6 things that we now know about Atzmos, right? Number 1, we said he has no definition. Number 2, we said it's the only entity that necessarily exists. God is necessary existence, the only actual existence. Number 3, we said he's not bound by any rules and therefore doesn't have to follow any of the rules. Number 4, we said that he has absolute free choice, right? It's God in his essence that has exercises free choice. That's unique to the essence of God. Another thing we said is that the essence of God is the source of atonement and forgiveness. And now we're saying, in addition to that, number 6 is that it's connected. The essence of the soul is connected to the essence of God. Okay, so far so good.
And the essence of the soul?
Yes, the essence of the soul is connected to the essence of God. The essence of the soul.
Because we always said the soul.
The soul is a part of God, and the soul is godly, but the soul is not it's not God. It's godliness. It's godly. It's a part of God, but it's not. We'll see in a second. Actually, that distinction might become a little clearer in a moment. So now, it seems like we've been climbing the ladder, right? These last couple of weeks, started from the bottom and working our way up. And we said already, I think in lesson 1, I mentioned right at the beginning that when we talk about higher and lower, what do we don't mean spatially higher and lower, right? We're talking about spiritual realms and realities that don't exist in our physical time and space. So when we talk about, let's say, Atzilus, the world of Atzilus, or even we talk about the worlds of Biyah, which are already creations, right? The world of Bria. Where is Bria? It's not in a galaxy far, far away. Bria is right here. And we can tap into that reality when we live with more God consciousness, because that's the function of Bria. So these spiritual spaces, the infinite light, it's everywhere. It's not somewhere away from here. It's in all these places. But still, when we say higher and lower, we talk levels. What we mean is distance in terms of more divine awareness and less divine awareness, right? So in the 3 lower worlds, Biyah, we're talking about something that's already a creation. Literally talking about more divine awareness, less divine awareness, and feeling sort of in a sense outside of God, right? You go up in Tatzilus, even when you go into the godliness realms, Tatzilus and beyond, into the worlds of Toyu, Tikkun, when we get up there to Ur and Suf, you're already in godliness, but even so, there are degrees to the awareness of godliness, right? And awareness of source. So you were going higher. So but now we're talking about the essence of God. Is that the highest? It's the highest point. So it sounds like we've now identified the highest point. Again, not spatially, but the highest point, meaning, and the less God consciousness you have, the further you are from that point, right? And yet, here's the plot twist. It's actually in the lowest of worlds, in our world, where we feel autonomous, where we have no divine consciousness or whatever, dormant divine consciousness that we have to sort of look for and find and awaken within ourselves. It's specifically there that, in a sense, we're the closest to Atzmos, to the essence of God. How does that work? So let's take a look here at text 8 from the Rebbe again. He says like this: the difference between, on page 193. The difference between the upper spiritual worlds and this material world of ours is that only the inhabitants of our material world experience their existence as entirely independent of any source. This is the difference between light and a created being. Light points to a source. When we see light, its existence informs us that there must be a source of light. By contrast, a material creature does not indicate the existence of the creator. In fact, it actively conceals God's existence by projecting itself as an utterly independent existence. Only logic demonstrates the incorrectness of this natural perception. In truth, our existence is entirely dependent on God, and it is only our perception that generates a sense of independence. Nevertheless, the very fact that we imagine ourselves to be self-generated is because our source is Atzmos, the absolutely independent existence. Or let's put it in other terms. Everything we have, everything about us, is baked into our genetic code, right? It's all in our genes, right? So here's the question. The physical world, everything in the physical world, and really more so than everything in the world, it's a quality that you'll find in everything that you see, every physical existence. It's a quality that in a sense is almost at the core of every physical existence. In a sense, it's even more so in the human being, more pronounced in the human being, is this feeling of autonomy, this feeling that I created myself. I don't have a source. I don't come from anywhere. I've always been here. Pharaoh, right? Yeah, the rulers back in the day that declared themselves deities, gods. They're God. So now, as Rebbe points out, logically we know that we all come from somewhere, right? We all know we have a source, but the feeling we have is that we're autonomous. Everything says, look, I exist. I've always been here, and I will always be here. That's sort of the default position of anything that exists. I take up space. I've always taken up space. Now, you can come to realize, obviously, if you do a little investigation, you realize you weren't always here. You're not always going to be here, right? You come from human beings. We come from our parents. But this sense, where does that come from? How do human beings evolve to say that we have no source? We're in the evolutionary chain, and by the evolutionary chain, I mean Seder Hishtalshalos. Does that attitude emerge from? Nowhere. Because we started, the Seder Hishtalshalos starts with the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light. Light, as we said, is all about expressing its source. So light says, don't look at me, look at my source. Right? While light shines, you see a light, you know it comes from a source. Light doesn't have the chutzpah to say, I don't come from anywhere. The moment you flick the switch, the light disappears instantly. Light is saying, I have a source. If that's the source of all of creation as it comes all the way down to this world, at what point do we make that change and go from knowing our source? So again, when we talked about Bia, so the world of Bria, there's already existence, right? We said there's Yeshus or Mitzios, existence. So I feel there's a sense of existence. But in the world of Bria, it's more God consciousness, very little of your own feeling of self. And that gradually keeps decreasing, right, or devolving till the point we get to our world where you don't feel any God consciousness, it's only yourself. But still, that attitude that I come from nowhere, that I've always, that I'm the ultimate existence, where does that come from? Everything knows its source. So it's more connected to its source, less connected to source, more aware of its source, less aware of its source, but it knows its source. At what point did we jump to suddenly not know a source, not know our source? Yeah, you understand what I'm asking? So the answer is, we get it from Atzmos, from the essence of God. The entire order of creation of Seder Hishtalshalos, term that we're all very familiar with already now. That's what we've been exploring now these last couple of weeks. The whole Seder Hishtalshalos is a flow of, it's an evolutionary flow. Evolution basically means, right, one thing evolves from another, which means that whatever is not produced, it's more complex. All of it can be found in a prior source. Right? Everything is evolving one thing to the other. Nothing new is really happening. It's a new formulation, it's a new development. But essentially, whatever is now being produced is already found in its original source. But nowhere in this evolutionary process is there this autonomous feeling. Right? Because the starting point of it, or in stuff, it's not autonomous. It doesn't feel it. So how do we evolve to have that feeling? That part of our makeup comes from the essence of God directly. And in a sense, it's really the core of who we are. It's the core of what makes our world the world that it is, the lowliest of worlds. Does this make sense? I'd say completely, I guess, on a similar vein, although not related to tonight's topic, this is the way at least the way I see something is, people talk about life, whether life has meaning or not, right? So I always ask people, I wonder, and I don't know, maybe there's another answer. I don't want to get into it tonight. I'm just going to throw it out there, right? Because I feel like it's a relevant question. But why is it that there are people, you could say there's no God, there's no anything, whatever, the world, it's all science, it's all whatever, and there's no purpose to any of this, right? And we have to, we make purpose because we invented purpose so we can survive as a species, so we can survive and not destroy the whole world, whatever. Okay. But the question then is, why is it that so many people, the vast majority of human beings, are bothered by not knowing their purpose? If there is no purpose, why is it that we evolve to search for a purpose? Right? If the whole thing is just evolution, there's no creator, there's no anything, we're just from a big bang. If there's no purpose in this world, then what purpose does it serve other than to give psychologists parnasa, to give them, so they can earn a living? Right? Imagine how much happier we'd all be if we weren't bothered by our purpose. If we didn't feel like we needed to matter. But if the whole thing is just one big accident, it's just a big bang, then how does this idea evolve? Where does it come from? What purpose does it serve? So to me, the only answer is, at least the most compelling answer would be, because we do have a purpose. So it's baked into us to look for that purpose because we have one. What's the purpose? There's a creator who created us with a purpose, and that's why we're going crazy. What is our purpose? Right? But if there is no purpose, we wouldn't be worried about it. Right? So the same idea. To say that we exist independently, that we are these autonomous beings, that attitude only comes from the essence of God and nowhere in between. From the Ein Sof all the way through all the worlds, all the way down to here, nowhere in between is there that attitude that gets imparted into this story of creation and existence. It comes directly from the essence of God. In other words, and this is the idea of Yesh Me'ayin, which is our fifth term tonight. Yesh Me'ayin. Usually it's translated right as creation ex nihilo, something from nothing. Yesh me'ayin, yesh is something, me'ayin from nothing. But here's a question. So yesh me'ayin is the way we describe creation. Our world is something from nothing. God creates, right? If you remember, no, I don't. It wasn't in this course. I taught a class when we talked in Genesis about the word bara, the word bereshit bara. Bara, God creates. Ramban Nachmanides says bara. This idea of creation only applies to yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, right? Something from nothing. Our world is created something from nothing. But here's the question. Wouldn't it make more sense to say our world is nothing from something? Based on everything we said tonight, God is the only true existence. He's the only real existence. Everything else is conditional existence and doesn't necessarily have to exist, right? Which means that all of existence is really actually arbitrary in a sense and not essential, right? In other words, all of creation's essential default nature is to not exist. So it's really nothing. The only thing that really does exist is God's essence. So if so, this world should be nothing from something. And yet we refer to it as something from nothing. Why is it something from nothing? This is the question the Alter Rebbe asks. He says like this. Let's look at text 9. The created entity is considered like nothing before him, meaning that it has no independent existence and is therefore utterly nullified before God. Nevertheless, that is only before him in God's perception, as viewed with the truth that is available exclusively above. However, the perception from below, i.e. the created being's perception, is that it is an entirely independent creation. This is because the energy that flows into a created entity is not understood or experienced by the entity at all. This is why we refer to creation as something from nothing, because we feel that somethingness we don't see, we're disconnected from our source, and therefore we don't see where we come from, right? And therefore we say we're something from nothing. Our source is nothing. We don't know the source, right? We're disconnected from it. So the truth is that we're nothing from something, but the perception is that we're something from nothing. But this idea that we're something comes from the ultimate something, right? And that, as I said, only God in his essence, who, again, we said we can't really define him, but who necessarily exists, right? Only the true existence can impart this feeling within us that we necessarily exist as well. It's a feature. It's from the DNA code of the essence of God, right? And nowhere in between, right? Because as we said, everything in between the essence of God and us doesn't feel that independence, right? Because it's aware of its source. Okay, let's take a look at text 10. The very essence of the creator, the ultimate independent existence that has no antecedent or cause at all, he alone has the exclusive power and ability to create an entity from absolute and total nothingness, to the extent that the created entity senses that it has no cause or antecedent at all. What does that mean? Again, or Ein Sof cannot produce something that says I exist. It doesn't have it in it's just not part of its It's not part of its repertoire. It doesn't have that ingredient for its recipes. So it can't impart that in creation. The only one that can is the essence of God, which tells us that the only thing that could create something that could feel independent is the essence of God. Right? Which means that where is the essence of God most present? In our world. In the lowest world. The world, because our world it operates sort of like an essence world where we feel like we exist essentially. Everything else above is busy, being nullified to its source and missing the point of what its source is. Text 11 from the Rebbe: the soul is a product of divine. This comes back to your comment before about the soul, right? About being a part of God.
Your
the soul,
comment.
well,
Page
and your
55.
yes, and your comment on the comment. The soul is a product of divine light, which is itself merely an expression of divinity. Conversely, the body is created directly by God's essence, whose existence is absolutely independent and has no preceding cause or antecedent at all. The soul recognizes that the body contains the above superiority. Because it longs to gain a similar advantage, it desires to bond with the body and its animalistic soul and to guide them through a positive spiritual transformation. So here's the funny thing. If you look at your spiritual hierarchy, you would say that the soul is higher than the body, right? Mm-hmm. The soul is supreme over the body. And yet, what emerges from this text is the opposite. It's the body that's higher than the soul. Because the body, which feels independent, that comes from the essence of God. Whereas the soul, which is part of the light of God, as it were, part of godliness, is godly, it doesn't feel independent. It doesn't feel so. It yearns for that sense of independence, which goes back to something we talked about when we talked about the two drives within us, right? And the power of the animal drive, the power of toihu. Why there had to be this chaos and this rupture and break, and then we had to, right? Why do we have to go through that whole process? If you remember that class, the idea of the power of the body over the soul. Right? The fact that the soul on its own is limited in a sense, and it's by harnessing the power of the body that it could reach new heights. Well, now we have a deeper insight into that as well, right? That the body itself is rooted in the essence of God. And so therefore, it's the soul's job to try and harness the body, direct the body, guide the body, and focus it towards its true self, put the body on the right path to true self-discovery. That's done through the soul, right? The soul is the one who leads the body to identify where it comes from. It's kind of like, behind us, you have the Ten Commandments, right? So there's a statement by Nachmanides, he's actually mentioned them a few times tonight already, who says that the tablets, right? We know the Ten Commandments are divided to 2 tablets, 5 and 5, right? 2 tablets. The first, if you look at and so why are they divided into 2 tablets? Why couldn't God just give us one tablet? Why couldn't it be 3 tablets or 4 tablets? And why is it broken down 5 and 5? And also, if you look at the text of the 10 Commandments, there's a lot more text in the first 5 commandments. The last 5, there's almost no text. So it's not even like God ran out of space on text on tablet 1. He had to continue on tablet 2. Because had he done that, he could have, made it aesthetically more pleasing and just have an equal amount of text on both things, right? And then it wouldn't have been split 5 and 5. So there's a reason that they're split 5 and 5. And the reason is because the first 5 commandments are commandments that are between man and God, and the second 5 are between man and his fellow man. So the second commandments are social, let's say, social commandments, and the first 5 are religious, right? The divine commandments. Okay. But there's one catch to that divide, which is that the commandment to honor your parents is on the first set. It's commandment number 5. Now, based on this division, it should be on tablet 2, on the second tablet. So you should have 4 and 6. So what's the meaning? Why is it that honoring your parents is on the first tablet, on the mitzvahs that are between man and God? The answer is because it's your parents that are the portal to God. If not for your parents, you'd think you created yourself, you have no source. You're cut off from your source. It's your parents who eventually come to realize, like, oh, I come from my parents. Oh, I have a source. I come from a source. It leads us back to the ultimate source of everything, right? So that's why it's between man and God. Right, because honoring your parents is a direct connection to serving on to God. Okay, and the text 12 from Sefer Yetzirah, the earliest work of Kabbalah, the end is wedged in the beginning and the beginning in the end. So see how it comes full circle, right? How we've been climbing the ladder, going higher and higher, and now what turns out is that when we get to the essence of God, where's the essence most available to be found is in the physical world, in this lowly world, and not even in the soul and the body, right? So we see how the end is wedged in the beginning and the end. And this relates, by the way, to something I said also in lesson 1, right at the beginning of the course. I said that the thing that differentiates, separates Jewish mysticism, because we entered the world of Kabbalah now in this course. What differentiates Jewish mysticism from other forms of mysticism is that in Jewish mysticism, the core principle is the end is rooted in the beginning in the end, and that and in the end, what matters most is the deed. So generally, mysticism is an escape from the material. It's enlightenment, it's reaching beyond the material. And in Judaism, in Jewish mysticism, what we discover is that the deeper the mystic goes, the more committed he becomes in the physical world, in the material world, in action, in behavior. The more appreciation he has for finding God in this world, in the lowest of places. Right? You don't have to go out of here to find God. You have to really dig deep within. So, and so we see this idea that the end is rooted in the beginning and the beginning in the end. And so what we've said that God, in his essence, chooses, right? So he chooses to, what is it that he chooses? So let's take a look now. Text 13, we're going to read. It's a very long text, and we're about to wrap it up. But let's because we're already expert Kabbalists after spending so much time together, let's read all of text 13 together from the Tanya. Okay? There's a known statement of our sages that God created this world to enable the fulfillment of his desire for an abode in this lowest realm. Now there's no higher and lower in God's presence because he fills every realm of existence equally. Rather, the description of our world as the lowest realm can be understood by first appreciating that before the creation of the universe, all that existed was God himself. The very space that the universe now occupies was entirely filled with God's presence. In fact, that remains the reality even now, from the truth of God's perspective. The change caused by creation is only in the perspective of the recipients of God's vivifying energy, because they receive this by way of multiple screens that dim and conceal God's light from their perspective, right? Now we understand what all this stuff means. We identify the concept of tzimtzum here, the concept of parsa, the concept of mamalik kalam, seva kalam, right? All these terms now, see how they kind of come to life. We're all familiar with these concepts here, okay? This concealing process is referred to as the hishtalshalos of the worlds, meaning their devolution from each other via interlinked, progressively dimmer realities, by way of countless steps of concealment of the divine light and energy. This continues all the way until the creation of this physical, corporeal, tangible world of ours, the bottom of the entire chain. There's no lower realm in terms of the concealment of God's light. It is a world of incredible darkness to the extent that it is filled with klipot, that oppose God in actuality and claim that nothing exists beyond their immediate reality. Right? We now know that's right. That's the lowest, right? And this statement, I think I've mentioned it at some point also in this course. The idea that he makes the statement that there's no lower realm, right? There's no lower realm than our world. How does he make such a definitive statement? Because, as he says, in our reality, you have the klipot that oppose God, right, and say that nothing exists beyond their immediate reality. Well, that's the lowest you can get from God, is to deny God, right? Now, what would be low? So, what would be lower than our world? What could be possibly lower than denying God? Well, the difference would be, in our world, we can deny God. I can say God doesn't exist, right? But also I can find God. It might not be easy, but I could come to discover the creator in this world. What would be lower than that? To deny God and be incapable of finding the creator. Well, that world would serve no purpose. The whole point is to find the creator. So our world is the lowest because this is the place where we can say, oh, there's no God. We can reject the notion of God. And so we can't get, but we can also find him. And so this is the lowest. This is the end of this is the last stop on the bus. The goal of the entire chain of interlinked realms of spiritual existence and the purpose of the progressively steeper descents in terms of divine concealment is not for any of those spiritual worlds. Rather, the purpose is to arrive at this lowly, tangible world. For it was God's original desire to derive pleasure from mortal efforts to suppress the forces of evil and to transform the darkness into light, until God's infinite light shines openly through the entirety of this world, the very habitat of ultimate darkness and the forces that oppose sanctity. That's the whole point. He wants a home in this dark place. He wants us to take this dark place and turn the lights on. Right? So what do we now know about the essence of God? And again, he makes an interesting statement here. He says, let's double click on this statement. He says, like this, right? I guess we're gonna have to turn this into a podcast now, since I said double click this. Let's double click here. What's he say here? The purpose of the progressive again is not, the purpose is not for any of those spiritual worlds. The purpose of this whole Seder Shalosh is not for the spiritual worlds, rather it's for our world. Why is that? The spiritual worlds just get further away from God, meaning less divine awareness, but they all feel their source. So what's the point? What point do they serve? What purpose do they serve? They don't. The purpose is in our world where we can reject God, where God is completely concealed, and to discover him there. And again, what are we discovering there? Not just another level of another aspect of godliness, God in his essence. That only happens in this world. All the other worlds, all the spiritual worlds, as lofty and as high and as wonderful as they might be, as sublime and spiritual and enlightening and beautiful and pure and serene and holy as they might be, are all just lower levels. They're godliness. They're not God. You find aspects of God, but you don't find him, right? It's God's beard, right? It's his eyes, his nose. It's not him. If you're looking for him, you find him in this world. The essence of God is here, right? And why is that? Because God desires a home in this world. God creates this world, and where does he desire it in his essence? Right? Again, we say the desire of God, that's because it's not compelled by anything. God desired a home in this world. And to make a home in this world, that means that it creates a world that could only come from his essence, because it claims to be autonomous, an autonomous being with no source, right? And to reveal its true source within it, that makes God at home in this world. How do we do that? How do we make this world a home for God? By fulfilling God's will in this world. We have a world that says, if you want to make a living, you got to work 7 days a week. The more you work, the more you'll make. And God says, I want you to keep Shabbos. There's 1 day a week, there's no work. Well, you say, well, how is that? Not going to add up. That doesn't compute, right? And yet that's exactly what God wants. So you can be in a space where God has one opinion and there's another opinion, right? And now you have a choice to make. When we do what God wants and buck the trends of society and the norms of this world, then we're making this world more godly. We're bringing more divine awareness into this world. So the way to do it is through performance of mitzvahs. And again, this idea of the end rooted in the beginning, the end, it's specifically in the realm of action. And our conscious lives, thought, speech, and action, and our behaviors, that's where we make that home for God, through our behaviors in this world, not through our inner world of our feelings, which more are aligned with the spiritual realms, but in that world of action, which is more aligned with and attuned to the essence of God. This is making sense? I hope so. Now, how do you find the essence? Well, this is how we find the essence of God, is by doing his will, by making the world a home for him. But this also, let's circle back to something we said before about tshuva. When we talked about repentance, and we talked about sort of the mechanics of it, right? The idea that since God is not bound by any rules, so he has the capacity to override the rules, right? Even though ironically, he's the one most affected by us breaking his rules, but he also, since he's beyond them, so he can choose to suspend them. Okay, and we talked about how do we get to that, because the essence of the soul and linked to the essence of God. Very nice. But the point is, there's a deeper point there, which we glossed over that I want to return to now, which is the reason that there's this concept of tshuva is because what we reveal when we come to the essence of when our essence of our soul is revealed, which is that our essence of our soul just desires to be one with God, with the oneness of God, the essence of God. That's deeper than what our behaviors. In other words, it's not just, let's say you have children and your children misbehave, right? So, you like structure, you like order, you want to discipline, whatever, all of your calculations, whatever it is that you have in how you're going to parent your children, fine. But at the end of the day, at some point you realize that none of that really matters. What matters is your child. That's most important. Now, how you deal with it, whatever, it's already a different story. Those are already lower levels. But sometimes you get to a point, it's interesting. Sometimes it's when our children sometimes are at their most vulnerable, maybe at their lowest point, when that's actually revealed. Isn't that interesting? The irony of that, right? So when your child's misbehaving and doing things they shouldn't be doing, you get mad or whatever, and you interact with them on that lower level, on the hashtalshalos level. And then sometimes your child gets into real bad trouble. And suddenly you find yourself accessing a love and a connection to your child and a calm that you didn't even know you had. Yesterday, when your child spilled something, whatever, you got mad. You got upset. You said something that maybe you shouldn't have said, or you said something, mean or out of anger. And today your child really screwed up, like really, really. And yet all you have is an open heart for them. Why? Because sometimes what that brings out is that core connection. And everything else is not relevant. So yeah, you want your child to be a good person. Yes, you want your child to do the right thing. Yes, you want your child to all true. All true. And you do want those things, and they're very important things. But in the end, your connection with your child is deeper than all of those as well. So we have to understand this point of God desiring a home in this world. When we say God desires a home in this world, it's not that God desires a home in this world, and the most important thing to God is the home in this world, and he needs us to make that for him. And so we matter also. Just like we said about Tshuva, the connection between the essence of the soul and God. God desires of in this world means he desires us. And how does he get us? By us giving ourselves to him. How do we give ourselves to him? By doing what he wants instead of doing what we want. By really schwitzing sometimes and going against the grain, right? And going against in the face of immense pressure to find him, to do what he wants for no reason whatsoever, right? Other than because clearly we want something more. And that brings us to our final text tonight. And text from the Alter Rebbe, which I think sums up tonight's class and in a sense puts a bow on the whole course. Let's take a look at text 14. Whom do I have in heaven? I desire nothing with you on earth. The love of, that's a verse in Psalms. The love of God expressed in the verse is to crave nothing at all other than God alone, not even the heavens or the earth. Metaphors for the higher and lower levels of paradise. Instead, all one's love is reserved for God's very essence and self to the exclusion of all else. When our master and teacher, Rabbi Shneur Zalman Liadi, the Alter Rebbe we've been quoting tonight, would enter a state of rapturous bonding with God, he was often heard to exclaim, I want nothing at all. I don't want your Garden of Eden. I don't want your world to come. All I want is you.
I want
you. All I want is you.
I want.
Yeah, but who's the I? And that want we know is already very deep. The I, the essence of me, what is want is you, right? Is you. That's it. All I want is you. That's what God wants. All he wants is us. And in turn, all we want is him. And in a sense, all of the wonderful aspects of godliness that we've been discussing and all of that, we come full circle and we realize that we want to go past all that. We're not looking for heaven. We're not looking for reward. We're not looking for paradise, for the Garden of Eden. All we want is that connection with God. And that desire is a reflection of God's desire. All he wants is us. And with that, I say thank you all for joining these last 6 weeks. Thanks for staying the course. And I'm going to wish you all good night until our next course. And we will now open it up for Q&A. So let me just at least stop.